All right, welcome to the Judiciary Committee this Friday afternoon, May 5th, and we're going to take an initial look at H351 so we can kind of ponder that a little bit and perhaps return to it at the beginning of next year. So I'll turn it over to you, Representative Beck.
All right, thank you, Chair DeLon. For the record, Scott Beck, representative from St. Johnsbury, the primary sponsor on House Bill 351. I was alerted to this issue, this problem, by the young man sitting to my right here, who's going to be far more eloquent and throw some interesting background and history and passion. But just to simply to lay out what the bill does, I think I see most of you have it in front of you. Presently in Vermont, the legal protections against libel and slander end the moment a person becomes deceased. And the estate that has to manage that person's, the remainder has no protection against libel or slander in the name of the deceased. And so what this language would do is it would extend that protection to the estate, so that if somebody down the road slandered or libeled a deceased person, that the estate could at least have their day in court. And that's basically what the bill does. It was something that I had never even considered or even thought about until this young man made me aware of it. And so with that, I'll stand up and I'll let you speak with Jared.
Great, thank you very much. Welcome to the hot seat, which is really not that hot, but if you could identify yourself and proceed. Thanks for being here.
For the record, my name is Jared Nolan. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Chair Lalong. I am a private citizen. I currently reside in California as an independent consultant, and I'm originally from Maine, I should add. So I have family in Maine still, and many family in Vermont as well. So I'm very happy to be here again.
California, did you say you're?
I live in Los Angeles currently, and I should begin. The way I was introduced to this loophole, as I see it, was working with the Michael Jackson estate and seeing what had transpired with HBO documentary, etc., and seeing that one party who was alleging many different things had no responsibility to present facts or evidence. And if Michael Jackson was alive, in the eyes of the court, he was innocent. And this would have been a much different story if he were alive in this example. So after thinking about and watching this all transpire, I thought about the namesake small businesses in my home state of Maine, as well as the state of Vermont, in which I feel as though Vermont stands upon its small businesses, and particularly namesake small businesses. And Representative Beck and I were just at a namesake restaurant for lunch today. So my interest in this is, if the founder of a restaurant or small business in Vermont passes away, even it could be a large business. Ben and Jerry's is a great example. They're still alive, so they still enjoy the protections of defamation protections. But for small businesses, particularly as being the most vulnerable, if they pass that business on to their kids now have the vulnerability of being subject to these defamation, slander, libel, and they do not have the recourse that someone who is alive would have. And a big point that I wanted to bring up also is that the truth is not defamatory. So if anyone was to allege something that was actually true, this would not abridge that at all. So I suppose I could open it up to questioning. I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
Well, just one question. So do you know how many states currently would allow such court actions?
There's an interesting statute in Rhode Island currently that states, to the best of my knowledge, I want to not go word for word, but up to 3 months after someone has passed away in Rhode Island, their estate can sue if an obituary has been published within 3 months of their passing that has language that's defamatory. So Vermont, so Rhode Island is a unique state, and it's the only, from my research, the only state that has anything like this.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Other questions? Yeah, Barbara.
So I'm just sort of curious about, are you an attorney? Are you in like how, can you just?
I'm not
give
an-
some context?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I went to the University of Southern California. I am not an attorney. I always wanted to be an attorney.
Play one on TV still probably.
That's right. Yeah. I'm on TV. I'm still interested in being an attorney, but that's still yet to come. So
So
I'm an independent consultant.
okay,
and
on
I-
this topic.
And for this topic, this was a passion of mine, actually.
But
So
that's not, your consulting business is bigger than this
Correct.
topic. Okay. I was just trying to like.
That's correct. Yes, certainly. This is a side project that I was, I had known people in Vermont that had, and I had carried this conversation to here through my own work for just myself even. So.
Interesting. Thank you.
Tom.
What's your read, obviously you've watched over this for a while, what's your read on this 3-month window that they have in Rhode Island? Why did they pick that number, or is it just arbitrary?
I think Rhode Island, I think it's a very peculiar protection that they placed in there. I don't know the history of that legislation there.
Angela.
So how would you sum up the argument against this bill?
I would, well, when I have conversations with people around this bill, oftentimes they point to it abridging freedom of speech. And my response to that is something I already said, which the truth is not defamatory, and this is not creating, anything that people aren't accustomed with already. Like I would never, I know I'm not going to speak defamatory about you behind your background, social media, etc. And so it's just this untold, thing that people aren't aware of. That people don't even know that they don't have this protection. But to get back to your question, another argument is that people who are deceased do not have reputations that could be defamed. And it's an argument that, dead people don't have rights. But my argument against that is, if you have a will, laws protect that will to be, carried out as you stipulated before you had passed away. There are other examples in which deceased people have rights. Like if you had a lawyer and you had the confidentiality agreement, that doesn't just go away as soon as you pass away. So that's sort of my argument.
My school debt doesn't go away.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. That's a great example.
Paying my law school loan, and it's
That's right. That's right.
So do you know of any cases that have taken up a common law defamation action that it's been rejected or it's been allowed where the state has sued under these circumstances, or somebody has sued under these circumstances? Well, actually, the estate would.
That's a good question. I know of certain circumstances where people have approached lawyers who, it's almost like a running joke among lawyers. When people approach them with cases like these, they tell them, this is a loophole that's existed forever. So I don't know anything that made it beyond a consultation with a lawyer. But there are many examples beside Michael Jackson where, in my opinion, something should have happened.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? No. Go ahead. Yeah.
I would just, I wonder if this is like more relevant now than ever, considering social media and
More opportunities.
the ability, the opportunities to blast messages out to their audience.
Exactly. Social media, eggs, and AI are only making it easier for someone to defame, and even doing it anonymously. So I think that is a big reason why there's, a ticking clock on something like this, because it's getting to a point where a person doesn't even have to be the one to send out a tweet. It's like robots can do this, but there's social media makes it much more dangerous, and I think much more frequent going forward in the future.
Ella?
This might be more of a question for Representative Knight, but I guess I just wondered, as you've been talking about this bill and talking with other representatives, have you heard about any instances of defamation in Vermont? And heard that that didn't help you.
I have not. I reached out to the Vermont bar at one point to see if any, and I think ran into the same wall with Jared, which I think is, if somebody who comes to council with this type of issue, they just, like, that's kind of the end of the conversation.
Okay. I have one last question for you. Who is it? Eric is the legislative counsel on this? Who's the legislative counsel?
It's been so long.
It doesn't.
Michelle's, right?
No, it's not on the, as in the
Oh,
news.
weird.
I'm looking at it.
That's a great question.
But that's fine. We have it on the wall there. I was just curious if you know off the top of your head. But that's all right. The legislative council is hidden in the way that we have it up.
Yes, it's it.
So, all right, I don't see any other questions, but, thank you very much for filling us in on what this is about. And our next step is probably to have Eric or whoever the legislative council is. It's just, I think that this is the area he covers. Come in sometime next year to explain this from that perspective as well. So really appreciate your time
Thank you all.
and enjoy the rest of your stay.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Scott. All right, we're going to turn to the only other item that we have today. Although I will give
Let's see, what is it?
an update later on S4, but
Oh, yay. Okay, yes. Good.
had further discussions with our friend downstairs. Hello,
Hello.
it's so nice to have you back here.
Thank you. It's nice to be back.
I didn't know we had any friends.
Oh, sure. We're all friends in this building. It's a big friendly building.
Oh, my, yes.
So we are doing a drive-by on, this is a bill that's probably going to pass out of Human Services soon. They just want to hear from us first, and it will probably be sitting in appropriations until next year, but they wanted to get this out. It is overdose prevention or safe injection sites, also known as, and we are not, as far as I understand, unless Michelle tells me differently, ruling on the whole concept, whether we love it or not. It is specifically on the immunity clause, although we'd love to hear a little bit about the concept because we're a very curious committee.
Nosy.
I didn't say nosy, I said curious.
So I'm happy to walk through the whole section 1. You don't want me to walk through the whole bill, do you?
I want you to just tell us no, I don't want the details, but you can kind of tell us what it does and why, and that would be nice if you.
All the other sections?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, just understand why we need the.
Sure. I mean, the other thing.
Excited about this.
Okay. All right. Sure.
We need some of that.
So for the record, Michelle Childs, and we're looking at draft 5.2 of the Human Services Committee Amendment to H72. So section 1 is an amendment to which you should be familiar with now, immunity section that's in chapter 84 that provides for immunity for good faith reports overdoses. So someone can't be then prosecuted for a drug crime if they call in to obtain services from someone. So that's current law. And what section 1 is doing is adding the new language with regard to overdose prevention centers. And so I'll come back to that since I'm going to just give you we'll walk through the rest and we'll go through in more detail section 1 because section 1 is what they want you to take a look at.
Right, and just for these other sections, just for us to hear, and we don't get to ask questions about these sections. We just want to hear what they involve, and we'll ask questions about our section after that.
72. Well, this is section 1 is amending this section that is in chapter 84 of title 18, which is a drug chapter. So page 4, section 2, this is amending the definition of organized community-based needle exchange program. And you'll see the language that's struck is limiting to who can provide those services. And so that you'll see the language that's struck on lines 15 and 16. So that it would allow a wider group of service providers. Section 3, this is needle exchange programs. We're just tweaking the language around. So there's this was adopted in 1999 and hasn't been amended since. And so the statewide harm reduction coalition that's included in there to consult with Department of Health doesn't exist any longer. So there's a student overdose prevention network. And then there's just added at the bottom there that a needle exchange program can apply to also be an overdose prevention center. Section 4, this has to do with a pharmaceutical manufacturer fee. It goes into a special fund called the Evidence-Based Education and Advertising Fund. This fee is being raised from 1.75% of the previous calendar year's prescription drug spending by the department to 2.25. And then on page 6, on lines 12 and 13, it's one of the things that the fund could be used for would be grants to overdose prevention centers to address the harms of the opioid epidemic. And so same language is in section 5, amending the language that establishes the Evidence-Based Education and Advertising Fund. Just on page 7, on line 16 and 17, again, adding to the list of authorized uses for those funds is for grants to overdose prevention centers. Then section 6 starts at the bottom of page 7, goes on to page 8. In FY25, there's $1 million authorized from that Evidence-Based Education and Advertising Fund for the purpose of awarding those grants. They can be either a fixed site or a mobile site.
So real quick, the no question doesn't apply to me. Chair privilege. That's the opiate overdose fund money. Is that what that we received from the settlement? Is that what?
No. No, this is the evidence, the one that I just went through on the 2 previous sections.
Right, but and where's that funded by? I'm sorry. So it's not the settlement money that we've received.
No.
Okay, that's all. All right, I just wanted to clarify.
No, this is an existing fund that's made up of the fees, and I'm sorry, I don't.
That's fine. You don't have to tell me where it is. I just wanted to clarify whether this one.
No, I think there was discussions about it coming from that first, and then they switched to this fund instead. So this is the appropriation out of the Evidence-Based Education and Advertising Fund for the purpose of awarding grants for the Overdose Prevention Center pilots. Section 7 is a study. So on or before December 1st of 2024, Department of Health is to contract with a researcher or an independent consulting agency with expertise in the field of rural addiction or overdose prevention centers or both. To study the impact of the pilot project that's being set up in this bill. And then it's to be kind of followed for 4 years. And then you'll see subdivisions under A, the types of things that they're supposed to take a look at. And then on page 10, you'll see subsection B is Department of Health is to provide the General Assembly with interim annual reports. So because it's going to look at these pilot projects for a period of 4 years, is they would kind of, check in with you annually just to let you know the data that they're getting. And then Section 8 is an appropriation for the study in Section 7. So in FY25, it's $300,000 from the general fund that will go to the Department of Health to fund the study.
All right, well, that kind of helps us understand the important part that we are actually supposed to weigh in on, I think. Getting a little bit of that background, I appreciate that.
Sure.
And if there are questions on all those other parts, either ask us later, or you can ask anybody on the committee of jurisdiction. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, having been a co-sponsor when Representative Coburn put those safe injection site bill in years ago, there's so much great, like, it's been a really important way of saving lives and coaxing people into, like, not coaxing people, but it has had the effect of people getting into recovery, and using a loan kills, like, people die. And so I'm thrilled that we are looking at this, and I'm really excited to hear about the part that you're going to tell us.
Oh, good. So going back to Section 1, this is this same section that I spoke about when we were talking about the drug checking language that was in H22. And I'm referencing that because we use the same standard in terms of the evidence that cannot be used against someone for a drug crime. And so it's amending 18 VSA 4254, which is the statute in current law that you've had for 10 years that provides for limited immunity for persons who report a suspected overdose. That immunity, which is like in the subsections under 4254 that aren't reproduced here because we're not changing those, that provides immunity for possession, dispensing, and sale. This immunity pertaining to the overdose prevention centers only applies to possession. So I just wanted to note that. So you'll see that on subsection J, people shall not be cited, arrested, or prosecuted for possession or subject to property forfeiture for participation in or with an overdose prevention center that's been approved by the department. And you'll see the folks who get that immunity on the subdivisions 1A, B, C. So it'd be a person who's utilizing the services of an overdose prevention center, could be a staff member or supervisor at an overdose prevention center, or could be a property owner who owns real property, who is leasing the property to an overdose prevention center. And then you'll see at the top of page 2, subdivision 2, language that I hope will look familiar, which is that the immunity provisions of the subsection apply only to the use and derivative use of evidence gained as a proximate result of participation in or with an overdose prevention center. And that's the focus, and we've kind of talked about that quite a bit during drug checking, which means that the person does not receive blanket immunity. It's only with a direct relationship to their utilization of the services at the overdose prevention center. So if they are at home and using drugs or something like that, like it has to be directly related to the use of the services from the center.
So there's one of two kind of ways we can be looking at this. One is if the immunity language looks fine, and but I think that there is a bigger question for this committee as well, and that is if we want to provide immunity at all, and bigger question even beyond that, and relates to that is, do we believe that this public health way of approaching overdoses and addiction, et cetera, as opposed to the criminal approach, which we've been using, is the right approach. So I just kind of want to put that out there. I myself would like to tell the folks upstairs that we applaud their efforts. The immunity language looks fine. And we really need to do something about the overdoses. And this public health method of doing this is appropriate. At least that's where I am, but I just said that just to open up for discussion.
Second.
But we can also look specifically at the language. I thought the language looked pretty straightforward, but Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is very much related to the drug testing bill that we spoke about not too long ago. And, we talked about at that time the importance of programs such as these in reducing deaths, which is ultimately what we need to be doing. And it was my understanding from what we've heard there and from other places that the public health approach will help prevent people from dying. And that is, very important, the most important thing when it comes to this. As for the immunity part, I think makes a lot of sense. We spoke a little bit offline about this, but, the immunity isn't blanket. It just is evidence gains approximate result participation in the overdose prevention center. It doesn't give someone, just because you do this once, now you can never be arrested for a drug again. No, it has to be for whatever reason. Maybe they saw you going into the center or something like that. But it seems very straightforward to me that getting people to overdose prevention centers save lives, get people off of drugs, and help them rebuild their lives. And I mean, we heard just yesterday about psilocybin, about someone who had the lived experience of opioid addiction, and how hard it was for him to get off of opioids. And so I think that evidence is also important to think about while we're thinking about this.
Tom.
I'm trying to get exactly what the purpose of the site is for.
Okay, I can walk you through the rest and it might help you.
Well, I didn't get to read the whole thing, so.
So if you look at subsection K, which is on page 2, right under the immunity language, and I think I've also said is that the immunity language is in subdivision 2 right above there is identical to what you have had currently in statute for the last 10 years and also what you used for drug checking. So it's the same standard around the use of evidence. So K is that these are the things that the Overdose Prevention Center would do. They provide space supervised by a healthcare professional or trained staff where persons who use drug can consume pre-obtained drugs and also medication for substance use disorder. They provide harm reduction supplies, including sterile injection supplies. They collect hypodermic needles and syringes and provide needles and syringes and disposal services. They answer questions on harm reduction and safer consumption practices. They administer first aid if needed and monitor and treat potential overdoses. They provide referrals to addiction treatment, medical services, and social services. They educate participants on the risks of HIV, viral hepatitis, wound care, and safe sex. They provide overdose prevention education, and they distribute overdose reversal medications, including naloxone. They educate participants regarding proper disposal of hypodermic needles and syringes. Moving on to page 3 is they provide reasonable security for the program site, establish operating procedures for the program, as well as criteria for program participants, and then they train staff members to deliver services offered by the program. You'll see right below that is that the Department of Health, working with the Overdose Prevention Network, would develop the operating guidelines for these centers. And then in M, an entity can apply to the Department of Health for approval to operate one of these centers. They can operate more than one. It could be an entity that is already running a needle exchange program or vice versa, because you might have a lot of people kind of working in the same service area with the same population. Also in M, it's that if an applicant complies with all of the guidelines, then they're to grant the application And if it's denied, then the department is to work with the center to kind of remedy the issues and try to help them come into compliance to be able to run the center. N has a reporting requirement. So there's a number of things that the entity has to be reporting the Department of Health, such as the number of program participants, de-identified demographic information about who's participating, the number of overdoses, and number of overdoses that are reversed at the center, number of times emergency medical services were contacted or law enforcement services were contacted, and the number of participants who were directly referred to other types of services.
So before we continue discussion, I feel I jumped the gun a little bit before hearing from our two witnesses that I wanted to just weigh in. I apologize. So before we continue that, I wonder if we can, unless there's other questions about the language for Michelle, we'll go to Tim and Marshall to get their viewpoints on what's before us, that part. So thank you for being here, Tim.
Yeah, no problem. Tim, leader Senior Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. And I did testify on this bill. I think it's largely the same as it was maybe a couple weeks ago in HHS upstairs.
Yeah, I mean, they've been fiddling around with language, but in terms of, I think, what your focus is, it's the same.
Yeah, and so, you know, from the way it was introduced as to where it is now, I want to say, on behalf of all state's attorneys, we really appreciate the intention of it. Life preservation, harm reduction. Our view is for obviously the justice involved individuals. So there could be people that have no criminal things going on at all in a future world where these sites are happening, and I have no opinion other than good thoughts and feelings for those folks that are going in and choosing in this future reality, which I hope in the future we can get to, where those folks are involved and they don't have like a pending case, or they're not engaged in trafficking or distribution or selling, which is different than possession, as Attorney Child just pointed out. As a premise, possession cases, when I dealt with them here in Washington County, 99.5% of them, 0.999, were going to Tamarack and diversion that I looked at if they were purely a possession case. So someone gets cited in by an officer for a small amount that was found on their person, maybe incident to something else. Even if it was maybe like a simple assault or something like that, and they had it on their person, incident to arrest, that case is going to diversion or Tamarack, and how a lot of prosecutors are dealing with things. And that's great. You guys have built that into the law, that this is the type of thing that can go into the Tamarack program, which is for mental health and substance use, which is co-occurring very, very often. It does sort of, you know, I won't speak for all the essays on this because it's sort of a end of session discussion. I do appreciate it. Sarah George reached out and said she's obviously in support of this bill. Not a surprise, said that representatives from Chittenden County. And I see this bill as sort of a piece of the puzzle in the conversation on this. In looking at some of the recent articles out of Oregon, I do want to point out that for justice involved individuals, the data that's coming out of Oregon is that 0.08% of people are choosing to engage voluntarily in treatment. 99.2% are choosing to pay the fine. And that is a future, that's just something I wanted to mention because it is the most recent piece. The other piece I wanted to note, because Vermont is so rural and, you know, a huge percentage of people are living in Chittenden County, the overdose prevention efforts there should be front and center because of the amount of people that are living in Chittenden County. But talking with our SAs who are from the more remote sections of the state, one thing that comes up is questions of equity, transportation. If an individual is driving from Addison County, Essex County to Chittenden County and does the right thing and they go to an OPS site in Chittenden County in the future, maybe a pilot program there, and they drive back and they kill 3 people like happened yesterday on Route 14, not to sort of be a skunk at this party, but I want to know how what we do about that. When the victim calls us and says, why couldn't you prosecute this case, even if it was just possession? So, yeah, and I'm not saying that's what happened yesterday.
Okay, all right. I was like, wow.
When people die on the roads, our offices are the ones that deal with those cases, the driving related incidents. Yes.
But just to be clear, Tim, this immunity protection, I mean, like, yes, perhaps you may not charge the possession thing, but I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's my understanding that immunity would be only applied to the use and derivative use evidence gained as a proximate result of participation in or with an overdose prevention center. And so in the circumstance you just mentioned, that evidence would not be gained as a proximate result of their participation. So it was gained as a proximate result of them being intoxicated on the roads and killing people. And so, the officers did a search, they found that, and
I'm actually not talking about the individual driver.
Oh, okay. Who are you?
I'm talking about, for example, someone experiences an overdose 2.5 hours away from the site.
Okay.
Right now, when people are receiving treatment, they have to wait a certain amount of time. And I'm talking about the liability for, let's say that someone decides to traffic at one of these locations, whether it's a doctor, because we know that the reason we have an overdose and opioid crisis in this country is because of the lawful distribution by doctors. And so I want to think about that liability carefully, because I'm actually not concerned about the individual that did the right thing. They're in the car, they went to an OPS site, they were told, you can go home now, you're fine. I'm thinking about that point there at the center. Did someone do something criminally negligent, civilly negligent? Was it tortious? I'm not really thinking about the individual driving. Of course, that's the person that the community may say, you got to prosecute that person. I think with my hopefully forward-thinking prosecutor brain, I'm thinking about, I want to make sure what's happening at the site is really excellent. And that's why the OPS sites that I'm aware of are more urban in nature, which is great. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't be exploring. You should. What I'm talking about is exploring how we figure out, I know there's been discussions of vans and mobile clinics, et cetera. That's great. I think that discussion needs to continue. But I am talking about sort of beyond the bounds of what it's saying here, how Vermont responds to that type of scenario. And I'm not addressing any solutions either, obviously, at this point. Yeah.
I just wanted to try better understand that circumstance so we can be sure that we're addressing it. So in a circumstance where some sort of provider at the opioid overdose prevention center acts in a way that, as you said, maybe criminally negligent, they tell someone to go home when they are not ready to do so, or some other act like that, you want to ensure that that person, that staff member or volunteer, could be prosecuted for their negligence in allowing the person to leave the center when they were not ready.
I think I want to emphasize just being careful. I don't have like an appetite to.
Right. Perhaps I was.
Everyone's trying to do the right thing. I'm thinking about the scenario where that happens, about how this, and hopefully like the Department of Health, when they're in the future world setting this stuff up, is thinking about the worst case scenarios, because it's great to think about the best case scenarios. But knowing that, people who are experiencing substance use disorder, they're making this great decision to go to the site. They shouldn't be liable because they did the right thing under this new structure. The provider is trying to do what they're trying to do. But I want to highlight two things. One, that doctors were the initial people in this country that were distributing things lawfully with pharma, and that individuals, like normal people, relied on those doctors to say that this is safe. And so I know that that's the intention here. But I also know that, like, when we see things like wrong way drivers, things like that, alcohol is a perfectly legal thing that we can all imbibe in, and yet it still results in a huge amount of accidents.
But let me make sure I have this clear. Because the immunity is only extending to unlawful possession. So your scenarios, if the doctor is providing too many drugs or is negligent in just how they're operating this, that's not, there's no immunity for any of that unless I'm missing something. Michelle, am I missing?
The immunity only extends to possession.
Right, so the staff members, if they have the heroin or whatever in their hand, they're not going to be violating possession. Same.
Yeah, no, that's, and I'm not focused.
We're not giving immunity to the bad practices or negligence.
And that's what I wanted
to
have you focus on. I'm not really saying whether or not that's what this covers. I'm just highlighting that it's the scenario that every single person that had a response to the spill, with the exception of State Attorney from Chittenden County, said, Tim, what about transportation to and from, and how do we deal with liability? But I think it is intended.
Which, and this doesn't provide any kind of immunity. And if there's the concern, I don't know that we should have immunity for, those kind of things to make sure that these are being carefully run. So Tom has a question.
Yeah, that kind of answered one thing I had floating around in my head. The next one is does this site provide some sort of supervision while the person is intoxicated by said drug? Or are they allowed to leave when they're under the influence?
I don't know if I have an answer, or I mean, I don't know that.
Is there that kind of supervision? It reminds akin to
Well, the way the treatment works right now is there is rules that are set up right now to make sure that people that are going to clinics right now are departing safely. So I assume that'd be a part of what the Department of Health would look at, but I don't know. I'm not an expert in that area, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's. Go ahead, Angela, sorry.
And just so that I understand, we're talking about immunity in cases of from like prosecution for possession. And as far as dispensing, the way I understand it, there wouldn't be a practitioner giving the drug. It says specifically a pre-obtained drug.
Right, so they'd be walking in. What I'm saying is that this committee should just be aware of the fact that I know people personally in my life have gone to treatment centers that are no longer alive, and they were doing the right thing. People that are my age that I grew up with, and they were doing the right thing, and they were going to treatment, and they re-engaged with the behavior because they would sell everything that they owned to get back into it. And I just want to stress just being so, and I think this bill, and I think Attorney Childs has done an incredible job at trying to address a lot of this, and the committee upstairs. But that's the concern I have, is just finding every possible loophole and gap, because I think you're right, dispensing is not covered, trafficking is not covered, and it's trafficking, dispensing, and possession being the lowest level of liability. And that's, what people have small amounts for this. And I just want to stress just how I want to think about all the best case scenarios. And our prosecutors are very interested in having fewer cases having to do with regulated products. And so we appreciate the intention, certainly. And it's about possession, which is, I think, just a great place to start, certainly. But thinking about the fact that there are individuals who are seeking to make huge amounts of money. There's something called a Berry gram here in central Vermont. You can make a huge amount of money off a gram of a illicit regulated product when compared to the same amount sold in a different part of New England. And that's just to say there is a market and a willing market here in Vermont. And so when we're thinking about these sites, it's important to know that there is going to be concern that is, I don't think, unwarranted given how fentanyl is intermixed with everything. I mean, there was cocaine overdoses in the last 3 days that were linked with fentanyl. And people who are voluntarily ingesting cocaine do not expect to be feeling the effects of fentanyl or any of the what are described as downers. So I don't think someone using cocaine, for example, might even, I mean, I can't speak, but maybe they wouldn't want to go to an OPS site in the prior times, but now everything being so infused with very dangerous downers like xylazine, known as tranq, and fentanyl, might say, yeah, everything that we have. So.
Can I ask just one more question? I don't see it here, but is there, or I would hope, as what you were describing before made me think there must be very strict, I don't know, strict regulations established by Department of Health or whomever oversees overdose prevention sites. And those regulations would, I would hope, would govern a lot of the things that sort of hypotheticals that you were suggesting.
I hope so too. Yeah, I don't know.
Does that exist?
I'm not an expert on how those regs are set up, unfortunately.
It's called for under section.
But certainly the bulk of the bill seems to be about making the right calls on that.
Okay.
So Michelle,
I was just going to say, so we don't have these sites now, so there aren't any rules, but the department will be developing guidelines, and then Human Services is still working on who they want them to consult with, but one of the latest things that is they want Department of Health to be working with the other states that have overdose prevention sites and developing the guidelines here, and so utilizing the experience and expertise from other jurisdictions that have these sites and developing rules. And I, haven't been in on all the testimony up there, but they have taken days and days of testimony on this, and so they've heard from a lot of folks about these sites and how they're operating and the safeguards that they put in place in terms of trying to ensure that comes to any harm, and since that's the point of this, is harm reduction, make sure that nobody walks out and harms themselves or anyone else. Is at the center.
Okay, so this bill, it's adding where needed, like in sections 4 and 5, like adding.
Right, section 1 is adding the immunity, which is the kind of first step. You have to remove we're gonna prosecute you if you're found in possession of it. And then it goes through and it sets up a pilot project and some funding for grants for the pilot projects in there, and then a study of those pilots over a 4-year period. Reports to the General Assembly.
One other thing, Mr. Chair, is that someone might have a probation condition or condition of release, often associated, I've seen associated with all sorts of other co-occurring behavior, where I just want the community to be aware that them going to the OPS site might be lawful in the future because they're going there to do that thing, but I'd want to make sure that the judiciary and like DOC could weigh in on what that looks like, because I think, again, it's narrowly crafted. And the last thing I wanted to mention was treatment courts. I want to always advocate for those and the further expansion of them, because right now they're serving several swaths of the state, but they're not serving every part of the state with the same level of, let's say, transportation, geographic equity, access. And that can result in the sorts of situations that I was just talking about, where someone's having to travel to perhaps a prior location that would be a trigger to the re-engagement. And so even saying, okay, someone had prior, I would say, habit-related behavior in this part of the state, let's get them involved in treatment in this part of the state where it's a little bit better for them. They're not going to run into the same folks when they're receiving treatment, et cetera. But treatment courts are also good for the crimes where there's victims involved, because they can see someone's going through this process, and we often receive really positive feedback from victims, and in where they're saying, "Oh, this person's going through this process. They're engaging with the judge. They're still alive. They're paying restitution. Perhaps they got their job. They got housing." And so in the future, when there is potentially an OPS site, someone's telling the judge, I actually did engage in using my drug of choice last week, but I went to an OPS site. The judge can maybe take that into consideration instead of doing, sort of old slap on the wrist. It's, you made that positive choice instead of using the prior more dangerous habits. You made that choice to go to an OPS site. That's great. But I do want to continue to advocate that the semblance of accountability, victim involvement, judge involvement has been pretty successful in a lot of cases. It's not perfect in every case, though. Just wanted to be another plug for treatment courts that have gone really well, and work with the defense bar on those and the judges, and it's a very holistic model. So that's kind of.
When is the court going to give us that mobile treatment court that we keep hearing about?
I would be an advocate of that.
Joe.
I'm not necessarily proposing this. I just want to throw an idea onto the table that involves 2 words that I think this committee have never want to hear again, which is dram shop. And when Tim was talking, I couldn't help but think about the parallel between why we have dram shop laws and what Tim was just speaking about, which is that, the purpose, as I understand, of dram shop laws is to ensure that a company that is dispensing a controlled product, alcohol, is doing so in a way that they are doing so ensuring sort of that they aren't giving too much to the person, and ensuring that that person is hopefully going to be safe when they leave that establishment. And that's sort of what Tim is saying. And what I also find interesting about the dram shop law is, again, it's not a criminal penalty, it's a civil penalty. And so it essentially is, if someone is killed as a result of over serving, it gives a cause of action against the bar. And so it just sort of triggered this idea in my mind that if this is something we wanted to pursue more and think about how to ensure safe behaviors by the staff in their policies, giving civil liability if someone is to leave there after being, as Tim suggested, not properly advised as to the current status of their intoxication, and they were to kill people, that might be a way to do it.
Yeah, I think that would take more thinking than what we have today, but I guess I would just comment initially that dram shop laws are a little bit different. It's a little bit wild, wild west. There aren't guidelines or rules for how these bars and establishments are to be run. And here, presumably, we'll see hopefully very strict guidelines, and presumably violation of those guidelines would certainly help a negligence claim against somebody. So I don't know, it's a little bit different situation, but could take the thought. And Michelle has commented on this.
I would just also point out is that overdose prevention sites are not dispensing any drugs. So these are pre-obtained drugs that come with a program participant, and the people who are on site are there to be able to respond in case there's an overdose or something. So they're not providing like the bar, providing the alcohol, things like that.
Right.
They're trying to make sure that the person is safe consumption of the obtained drugs.
And I see the sort of pieces of the puzzle, like with H222 doing the checking about whether things are what's in there, and then the observation. I mean, you guys are approaching it from lots of different, the proper angles. So I appreciate what you're doing, but I did want to just know if there's concern about that down the line stuff.
Sure. Tom and then Angela?
I think some of the, it's hard to decide on the immunity issues if we don't have all the rules in front of us, actually. I mean, are they going to stay in this site under supervision while they're hired? Or are they going to be able to walk away? Similar to a bar, we can't let this person leave here like this.
But again, the immunity is for possession only.
Right.
It's not for.
Well, I was just, okay.
Yeah, it feels like a separate question.
Yeah, I mean, whatever those, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Angela, they know.
Well, I guess I'm feeling similar feelings, maybe, Tom, that I wish we had the guidelines to look at. And so I was just wondering, not necessarily probably for a host of legal reasons, and then if we're just keeping it within immunity from possession, prosecution, I understand that. But I noticed in a section we're not supposed to be looking at, it does say that the department shall award grants based on an applicant's ability to establish such sites in accordance with guidelines established by the department for overdose prevention sites. So that's page 8, lines 6 through 8. And my question then is, Michelle, I don't know if you've heard any conversation in the other committee. It doesn't, I understand it's implied that those guidelines would be established before grants are awarded, but it's not stated. It's not explicitly stated, and I don't know, maybe it doesn't have to be, but
in the pilot language, it doesn't need to be because it's up in the immunity. Nobody's going to do it unless you click in and you follow everything under the immunity section. You have to comply with that as well as the guidelines.
Right, and it's just the guidelines that I'm curious about. Like the guidelines haven't been written, right?
No, because nothing exists yet.
Right, and this is saying awards will be granted, grants will be awarded in accordance with guidelines established. Those guidelines haven't been established. It just doesn't say that the guidelines will be established before the grants are awarded. Maybe that's totally implied.
I think that's.
Yeah, I don't think they're not going to issue grants before the program is set up.
Yeah, okay. It just feels like if that's a big piece that's missing, and even considering.
And I hate to break it to the committee that if there's guidelines that come out, it's not going to be in here.
Yeah. I think there are legal implications.
Right, and like.
Ella, and then back to Tom.
So, I think the immunity from prosecution for possession is comfortable and fine. I think the title of immunity from liability is very concerning and not appropriate. And there is not evidence in the rest of this bill that I'm finding quickly that shows that there's public safety concerns are thoroughly addressed. I think that's what this body is raising. Where are the public safety protections for such a system? And I think, I wonder, shouldn't that be maybe a little bit more thoroughly addressed?
Public safety?
So I mean,
Are we saying all the public safety needs are already existing? Yeah, I mean, that's what I hear you raising is there's some other aspects to liability of the
Yeah, maybe
people
it would
involved.
be almost outside the bounds of the bill, because I think,
I get it.
because you guys have done good at focusing me back on possession immunity. I think that's important. I think that in a way, if this stuff is all set up, I was talking with Representative Small about this when I testified upstairs, but if the stuff is set up really well, then the immunity clicks in as opposed to presumption of immunity at the start. And I like that idea of addressing the guidelines, addressing public safety, and then immunity clicks in once there's been boxes checked, as opposed to kind of the other way around. But
Right, but we're considering steps 2 and 3 without seeing step 1. I think that's where the questions are coming up. Not objections, just
I know, and it is fairly narrow immunity, and so maybe I'll take it back as far as in those guidelines, if there are questions of public safety that, and when public safety is such a broad statement that not all public safety issues, they mishmash into public health, and it kind of can become a little messy as far as who actually has the expertise or the jurisdiction, but we don't know yet, and we'll have to see what the guidelines are. You're right, we're gonna.
Maybe you could share that, we would be interested in them including that the Department of Health needs to consult with public safety officials in the development of the guidelines. Is that, maybe I'm off base, but.
So is the consultation stuff still going on, Taylor? As far as who's going to be consulted with? Is that conversation still going on?
Of who is going to be consulted with?
I thought that Michelle or somebody mentioned that that's one issue that's still going on as far as for the.
Sectional.
Talking about, for the record, Representative Taylor Small.
Thank you.
So yes, in further conversation, we are looking to update who the Department of Health is collaborating with when it comes to the operating guidelines, and looking to other states that have already implemented overdose prevention centers or in the process of doing that, in particular looking at New York and Rhode Island. But if other states beat us to it, then of course we still want to collaborate with them and understand what considerations they've put into place. I will also add that though the Department of Health is not in support of this bill, the commissioner, when he first testified, acknowledged that the immunity provision is the first step that we would need to take before being able to move forward with guidelines and other procedures, because if the protections aren't in place, why would we put guidelines for a site where folks would still potentially be arrested for using?
So the consultations with other states, not with other entities, like if it was like the Department of Public Safety.
Correct. It is with other states' Department of Health, as well as community stakeholders here in Vermont.
Right. So I would say that's an issue that we can revisit, but I also kind of think of it's not really similar, but liquor and lottery, we don't deal with those kind of issues either, of whether it's going to be served at the curbside. And it's not black and white as far as when we are involved and such, but we'll just have to monitor that as well, is what I would suggest. Tom was first and then Barbara.
I understand the immunity thing when it comes to, being arrested for being in possession of whatever. I'm just trying to wrap my brain around this a little bit more. If I'm at home and I have my drugs and somebody helps me use them and I pass away, is there a potential criminal charge there?
yes, yes, there is, yeah.
And if somebody at a safe injection site or one of these centers helps me with my drugs and I pass away, is there still a potential criminal charge here?
My read of the bill, if they're going there for that purpose, and I wouldn't want to speak for Attorney Childs, but if they're there just for the possession itself, it seems like the immunity is. So, yeah, probably not, unless it was like, unless you were the provider and you were trafficking it to the person, then that's not covered by the bill, or you were dispensing it to the person. I'm sorry, but if the person is going in
I'm trying to keep it as narrow as possible, given the bill's just talking about possession immunity. I'm not sure. And obviously, if you call law enforcement, said this person's experiencing an overdose, then the Good Samaritan thing kicks in, and then not to be prosecuted for that either. If you're just doing it for life-saving measures.
So, Taylor, is the study for overdose prevention systems, who's that going to? Is it going to Human Services? Is that where the study and overdose prevention center are looking at Section 7?
Yes, so that is coming back to the General Assembly and will be in collaboration with either an independent consulting agency or the ultimate hope being university researchers, similar again to what we're seeing in Rhode Island and New York. And if I might add, Mr. Chair, just a piece on overdose prevention centers that the personnel there are not helping folks to use the drugs that they are bringing in. And so they're instructing around safer practices when using and are really present in case that person overdoses.
It's like a lifeguard.
What?
It's like a lifeguard.
Just like a lifeguard. I think another, a safer consumption site that I think we already see in practice is bars. Folks go and they use alcohol and at some point they are cut off. And I hear the concern of someone using drugs in this facility and then going off and being high in public. But again, we have these similar places and structures already in place. And this is just expanding access of ultimately people aren't dying when they're using.
And I see that the study and such is going to the General Assembly a bit more broadly. So I take back what I said as far as making sure that we would see that. But Barbara has a question.
So actually, I just wanted to put out that other countries have done this for a while. And I know New York started it in 21, Rhode Island, I don't know, roughly the same time. And I think there have been like 0 deaths at them. So, but in terms of public safety, it's not like they're dispensing there or there are new drugs circulating. So I heard from people who feel uncomfortable when they're walking down the street and they're watching someone inject on the street. So they don't feel safe, or if they're a needle. So in some ways, it improves the current public safety, I think. And I think we are lucky in this case that there are a few states that have gone before us and have figured it out. And it has saved like the number of lives that have been saved. Like New York had great results, like in the first few months, like I think 60 people's lives were saved. And then the percentage of people that then think about, usually these sites have showers or food or somebody you can talk to if you want to think about getting into recovery. And there's like double-digit percentage of people who end up going into recovery that never would have thought about that before and feel like they can do that. So I think if people like looked at, like there have been great NPR pieces on it, like it's been a good thing where it's happened. It hasn't been like, wow, hash bars in Amsterdam, let's have more people. It's not a draw in bringing more drugs for tourists in.
And therefore we should approve the immunity for possession.
I mean, I think we preliminary, I would support doing a preliminary. I mean, obviously it's a chicken and egg, like, right? There would need to be more details, but it's not, this is not the case of here's an idea. Let's try this and see if this works.
Right.
It's been
so the public safety issues aren't as concerning to you too.
So I'm not worried about public safety weighing in, I guess. I mean, law enforcement.
No, I don't think it doesn't really fit in here very well. I think it's just a matter of, as these are getting close to opening up, we need to continue to pay attention in this committee as well as the primary committee, which will be Human Services. And that's why we're doing this today. And this is actually sometimes, I think this was started in here, didn't it? And we transferred it up to you because most of it really deals with the jurisdiction there. So.
And like it's the longer we delay it, the fewer lives we're going to save. And You know, like,
Get it out.
we all, I have a feeling we all know people, as Tim has said, that have become victims of drug overdose.
So we're going to hear from Marshall as well.
Thank you, guys.
And this very quick drive-by that was going to allow me to take a walk before floor is quickly leaving me. That's fine. This is important work, and I appreciate the conversation.
So I'll be very brief. We're very much supportive of this bill and of the immunity provision. Overdose prevention sites are really, I think there's been a lot of the way that it's been discussed by some witnesses, both upstairs and down here, is as sort of an alternative to, or as sort of a form of treatment or something. And it's not that. This is harm reduction. This is about taking people who currently are doing things that are very unsafe and trying to give them access to ways to do those same things in a more safe manner. I personally, in the last week, have had clients of mine who have died of overdoses who, just incredibly tragically, who would have been exactly the types of people who would have availed themselves of an overdose prevention site. And an overdose prevention site really does fill a number of roles, none of which are related to, as people sort of talked about, like dispensing or providing people with drugs or even attracting people to use drugs, which I think makes it quite different, for example, from a bar where you are actively trying to get people to come and drink or your bar is going to go out of business. And in fact, more of the services that are provided there are essentially, I think somebody had given the example of a lifeguard. It is essentially life-saving services. The sites that I have had experience with provide drug testing, which is incredibly important right now because the drugs that people are taking in Vermont right now, nobody knows what's in them. You can look at, if you're ever bored and want to see, if you can look at drugdata.org, shows analysis of various drugs. And if you look for that, you don't typically see very many samples from Vermont there, but if you look at samples from Massachusetts, you see lots of them. And it's the same stuff we're getting in Vermont. When you read Vermont affidavits that describe the stamp bags that we're seeing in Vermont, it's the same stamp bags that you're seeing analyzed on drugdata.org. And, half the time, everything that's sold as fentanyl, as heroin, has no heroin in it whatsoever. It's amazing that, like, the variety of things that are in these drugs is incredible. The amount of ways that you can overdose is incredible. It's made it much riskier to use drugs now than in the past. I mean, when I started doing this work, we had opioid overdose problems, and it was all associated with pills, oxys. And we had a lot fewer overdoses than we have now back then because there was dose control and a lot more certainty about what was in the product that people would consume. People don't want to consume products and die. They don't want to overdose and die. And this is simply providing protection for people who want to help people not die. And from my perspective, the immunity from liability is so narrow. All it provides is that if you're one of these people who is working at a site like this, you can't get charged with possession if you are briefly in possession of somebody's heroin. And that's all. And from our perspective, that's a no-brainer. This is very straightforward harm reduction work. It is in no way crosses the lines into anything that would entice people to use drugs that aren't currently using drugs. And in fact, harm reduction sites have a really great track record at getting people into treatment, even though that's not their focus. And treatment is not always, most people who go through treatment go through many times before they manage to get sober, clean and sober. And for that matter, many people never go through treatment and still manage eventually to become cleaner or soberer or more functional. And this is just providing another avenue for that. And so we're very much in support of it, very much in support of the immunity from liability provision within it.
Questions for Marshall? I don't see any, so perhaps we should co-locate the psilocybin dispensary type place or at one of these treatment centers, because we heard some good testimony yesterday afternoon that somebody used psilocybin and it really helped him break his heroin habit.
I heard that testimony too. It was very compelling.
Very interesting.
Political reasons, I would hate to see those two tied together.
Yeah.
I mean,
Understood. That's really a serious suggestion.
a real possibility that I think are really, something that are on the horizon in the next few years and are going to be saving people's lives that quickly. So thank you very much.
So our, Will. No, I was just wondering if folks are, I think we can go ahead and just have a straw poll that we're fine with the language that we're really focusing on, which is the immunity. Folks that are fine to say thumbs up for that immunity, we don't have a problem with that issue, although obviously we're going to be tracking this down the road. Raise your hand. Those who rather not deal with any of this stuff whatsoever. So, okay. So, I mean, it's 7-1. I don't think there's any kind of vote that we really need. I just need to know that we're fine with it. But yeah, and very nice job. Thank you so much for working on this.
Thank you for your review.
Yeah, absolutely. Will, yeah.
No, I'm good.
So Monday, a question for folks. We do need to, in fact, consider possibly, I'm not even sure that this is going to happen, an amendment for S4. What's your pleasure? Coming in at 11 and then having a lunch break and then on the floor at 1, or just coming in at noon and taking this up?
How long's the floor going to be?
Forever.
A few hours.
All right, a few hours is not forever. It's going to be a long floor where I don't
At least
think.
two.
On Monday?
It's not so bad.
It's not bad.
Monday?
I was thinking
Two?
worse.
I thought it was more, isn't it what, S100?
That's 100. And then, but the other bills don't seem to be anything. I mean, there's
I guess I don't
a
want,
handful of other bills, but
I mean, if people are willing to stay after whatever, but I thought it was going to be a long floor session on Monday. I mean, people rather just come in for the floor at 1 and then whatever happens to be the time afterwards. But I prefer to do it before in case there is an amendment, in case
Do you think there really is one? I am not putting one in.
No, I'm working on a potential.
Oh, okay, all right, I didn't know if.
I prefer to do it after. It would be a lot easier for me to do after than before.
All right.
Or.
So let's play this a little bit by ear, but yeah, all right, fair enough.
Can you just tell us what the amendment is and then we can just say
I don't know.
no or yes?
No.
No.
And I don't know what it is yet. Precisely. I have ideas. I think that you all will just love it.
I think stealthing is going in.
So all right, I will send out an email and a text and if I really need you to be here at noon, if I find out like it's not going to be able to do it otherwise. But otherwise, I respect what you're saying, Joe, and I'll try to not have to do that. For various reasons, that may be necessary. So we'll adjourn until sometime on Monday.
yeah. And just to be fair, I mean, looking at the calendar, we've got S100, which will take a while. But what we don't know is what bills are being voted out necessarily today.
Right.
Because there is going to be a token session tomorrow.
So
it could be longer based on what is voted out.
And I think that's, the kind of what I was kind of gathering. And I did suggest to the speaker that can we not be on the floor? And she didn't like that idea. She said, why not ask them to come in at noon? All right.
We have to take our caps with that.
All right, speaker, I will do
So we
that.
have to already reschedule everything that we shove on Mondays.
I know. including cats to the vet.
2 months ago, you should have realized that the Monday of the
But they're
last week.
newbies.
But
They're
they are
newbies.
new that
They
we did
didn't
not
know.
communicate this well enough to you that.
And even though I
I
knew,
have standing commitments on Mondays.
right, I mean, even though I knew it, I have a.
Chalk that up as a lesson learned for leadership. So next time they can say, when you're looking at the last possible 2 weeks, actually the last 2 weeks of session,
Yeah, we're just getting.
And fingers crossed that Monday is the last Monday we're here and it's not the next to last Monday that we're in session.
Yeah,
No, I definitely couldn't be here on the 15th.
we're trying